what I thought I'd do today is talk about the 3Y0J Bouvet Island expedition, which is a 2023 expedition to this remarkable place. I'm doing this entirely from the point of view of an interested observer. That's all it is. And this is a DXpedition that has gained an enormous amount of publicity if you look in the right places in the amateur radio fraternity. And it's just a fascinating story, I think, about doing something above and beyond and then some, and how the story unfolds. So I've just got a few slides that I'll whiz through, and you can get a feel for what some of these guys get up to. And well, I can't answer questions because I've nothing to do with the expedition. But on the other hand, yeah, I may have picked up some of the stuff on the way through, and you can have a feel for it.
I'm kind of guessing because it's got penguins and it's snowy, it must be somewhere around Antarctica.
It definitely is Antarctica. And my first question is, indeed, how far would you go for amateur radio?
Probably not there.
So this one here on the left-hand side is actually Phil's setup on one of the recent, actually, was it the 432 one? I think that was the 432 AFS. So he goes as far as Brill or somewhere like that, and sets up on a local hilltop. Maybe you do things like James does, activating SOTA summits, or even this Rocky Mountain top here. So people do go to extraordinary lengths to do stuff.
Just as a slight aside, where I am at the moment. So basically, we're like the north of Tenerife. So behind us is sort of quite high mountains. And yesterday I did this walk. There was a footpath, and it literally went upwards about 1,500 feet. And I could have kicked myself. I could have brought the 817 and set up because he had basically your 1,500 feet and with a takeoff right over the North Atlantic. It was perfect.
Yeah. If you,
absolutely superb from up there. But,
it's all about forward planning, isn't it? And thinking what you can do. And if you're doing just SOTA work, then James, that you have to do quite a bit of planning to make sure you've got everything. And I remember Dave G1MZD, who goes out and doing some of the activity contests, and he was going down to the south coast to visit whichever of his mother-in-law or something in Portsmouth. And so he thought he'd do the 4-meter one on the way back on the top of the hill outside Portsmouth. Got everything set up and realized he was a connector short. And when you're a connector short, you might as well just pack up and go.
I walked for several hours to the top of very remote Scottish mountains only to find out I'm missing the vital connector.
Yeah, and it happens. So planning is definitely of the essence, and you'll see with this expedition there's quite a bit of planning. The next question is, how much would you spend for your amateur radio? A few £100 on some kit, maybe 1,000 or two. How about $715,000? Is that per person? That's the total budget. That's the total budget. Yeah, total budget. $715,000. I mean, give or take, probably give quite a bit more because these things are. That's the level of spend on an expedition like this, which is pretty extraordinary.
How many would typically attend? So what would that be split amongst?
Yeah, well, the next question is indeed, oh, hang on, I'll come back to that in a minute, about where do you get the money from? The reason why it costs so much is you're going to a place there where the little red dot is. And just to give you an idea, that's the Falkland Islands there, which feel fairly remote. It takes quite a long time to get there. That's South Georgia, which is a bit more remote, and then this place here, which is literally in the middle of nowhere. And if I go to my web browser and do a maps here, and it's quite used to finding
I think he is. I look forward to it.
Bouvet Island, right? Okay, so so this is what Bouvet Island looks like, and whether you see it on the satellite view or other, it's about the same. In other words, it's virtually entirely covered in ice, and then so you zoom out a bit, and let's get rid of that bit. So you zoom out a bit more, and 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 zoom out a bit more. And eventually, that's South Georgia over there. There's
Well, you're nearer Cape Town, aren't you, than South Georgia, or you're in between?
Now, and I'll show you how they got there, because they started from the Falkland Islands, and the reason for that is they were on a sailing ship, and the winds tend to go from left to right.
Roaring Forties, isn't it?
Well, that's right, yeah. So there's the Falkland Islands. Look, they're almost on a continental shelf here. That's
wow.
Quite nice. And there's South Georgia. But this thing's just stuck in the middle of
It's a rock, isn't it?
It's a volcanic rock that's been.
It must be like sort of 1,500 miles from anywhere.
Yeah.
Either direction.
Yeah, yeah. So to get there is not easy. You know, there's no planes that go there because you can't land there. So even if you could get a plane, you could only have to use a light aircraft, and that wouldn't have the range to get there. So the only way of getting there is by boat. And I'll mention a bit about some other expeditions that have also tried to get there by boat and have not succeeded. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to actually get to this place. So here we are. It is known as being the most remote island on Earth. And that's in terms of the difficulty of getting there as much as anything else as well. So why would you want to go to Bouvet Island? Well, if you look at the top 10 most wanted DXCC, DX Century Club entities, then after North Korea, which is just rare because nobody lets you operate amateur radio there, Bouvet Island is number 2. So it's quite a lure for people to want to work it. And as a result, it's quite a lure for those who want to mount expeditions to mount an expedition there, so they can work a whole bunch of people when they get there. The aim of the expedition was to make something like 200,000 contacts, and you'll see the complexity of the station which they planned, including all the connectors. Now, I haven't got a list of all the connectors, but hopefully they had all the connectors there, and countless amounts of coax and diesel generators and power and all the rest of it. But look down that top 10 list, and you know, maybe you'll succeed in working some of them occasionally. But if any of them do come on the air, then they do evoke quite a lot of excitement and interest and madness. Not to mention the undesirable side of amateur radio as well, which are always going to light some of these expeditions. So how do you get there? Well, the way they got there, they chose, was to assemble in the UK. The reason why they assembled in the UK was you have to get an RAF flight to the Falkland Islands first, and they only go from the UK. So Bryce Norton is where they assembled. Well, they assembled in London and then went out to Bryce Norton and got a jet down. They refuel at Cape Verde, just off the African coast, and then whizzed down to the Falkland Islands. And then they took this yacht, and I'll show you some pictures of the yacht. Very nice looking boat. But you know, I was thinking of a huge motor steamer or something like this, but no, it was actually a sailing yacht with motors as well. But for most of the journey, they're just using the wind, and there's a lot of it down there. So that's again one of the problems about getting there. So it's quite a journey to get there. They didn't take the kit on the plane. They took the kit in, or they loaded the kit into a standard container, which was taken by ship. So that took about a month or more to get down to the Falkland Islands from, I'm not sure if it went from the UK or whether it went from Norway. Oh yes, I just mentioned the call sign 3Y0J. Well, 3Y0 is the prefix for Bouvet Island. It's actually a Norwegian don't know if you call it protectorate, because there's nobody there, but it's a Norwegian property. It's the world has recognised that it's Norwegian territory. So actually, quite, yes. and you'll see when you see the team, 50% of them are Norwegian. So this was a Norwegian-led expedition. The others primarily were American, with one German guy. And I suppose the money comes in from America as well. So.
Previous attempts that wasn't successful, yes, they left from South Africa.
Yes, yes, and if it's a motorised one, a motorised boat, then it will tend to come down from South Africa.
All the benefits are going by yachts to Bouvet.
Yeah, well, I guess they worked out, maybe they didn't want to have quite so much motoring going down there. But this, the boat that I'll show you some pictures of, it does ply the seas, the southern Atlantic Ocean. And you can book a trip on it, to go from the Sierra up to Uruguay or somewhere or other. They do sort of regular excursion trips. Which you've got sea legs, it's fine because it's not very far in the southern Atlantic. So conditions on Bouvet, it is always windy. This is off windy.com. And this is, yeah. Very windy.com. Here we are. Windy. Yeah, so this is what the wind is doing at the moment. When it loads, there we are. So it's not too much up in Scotland at the moment. We're not generating so much power from Scotland at the moment. But if I zoom out and we whiz down to the south, oh look, there we are, another storm going through. In other words, this roaring 40s, as you say, all the time there's just storm after storm going through here, and they're all going from west to east, all of the winds. So when you pick up the wind and get in the right position, you can get there quite fast, although it can be a bit on the rough side. Yeah, well, that's why actually what they are doing now is they are now going up to Cape Town to finish. So the whole journey is a west to east and then going north again. Yeah, that's right. There'll be an awful lot of tacking to get back. Mind you, the boat itself has got to get back, but I think it'll pick up those trade winds going up that way then, to go up to Brazil, and that'll be their next trip. And then they'll sort of go, they don't go to Bouvet Island on a regular basis. This was a special excursion. And and I don't know how much the guys had to pay to hire the boat, because it's like, a month and a half or something, 2 months hire of this very expensive yacht, and the crew, and and all of the, yes, that's right. So that's what windy.com is jolly interesting little website to go see what's particularly going on, as I say, up in Scotland, which is where over here, which is where most of our wind turbines are. So, anyway, right. So it's
really good. It's really good.
Yeah. So as I say, it's always windy down there. So it's just a matter of, are you going to be lucky or not? And we'll see what happens. There's the team. There's actually 12 people there. There was a 13th, but I don't know what his name was. So hence he's not on my chart. So sorry about that, the other guy. But there's the 12 people, and as you can see, these are the three leaders. These three on the left-hand side, Ken, Rune, and Erwan. So they're all Norwegians, and they're the joint leaders of the team. So if there was any decisions to be made, it was on their shoulders. And the rest of them were seasoned operators, shall we say, and to some extent, if they can be seasoned expeditioners.
Seasoned definitely is.
Right.
Expedition by itself, very cold.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get an invite for this. No, invited me to the team.
Did they?
No, no.
Oh, they didn't. No, right. Yeah, you weren't quite on the list. So just how you get on the list and what points you've got to get. No idea. But certainly it seems like the Norwegians are well seasoned in Arctic conditions. And I was reading some, I haven't got any of the stuff about this, but reading some of the stuff when they were doing the preparation work for it. You know, there was massive amounts of exercises that they did up in the north of Norway to work out all the kit that they needed, all the tents that they needed, all of the generators that had to work down into whatever temperature it was, you know, cold adapted but generators and so on. So that's the lot of them anyway. Then the question about, you know, how on earth do you raise 715,000? The sponsorship by a whole range of commercial organisations. There are clubs and foundations like the CDXC, which is actually called the Chilterns DX, but it has nothing to do with the Chilterns anymore, as far as I'm aware. It was probably Don Beattie, when he was living in this area, was one of the key players in that. So various foundations who, you know, DXs and so on. The team members themselves had to pitch in money. I think, although I've not found any reference to this, I think they had to pitch in about $20,000 themselves each to be part of the team. So your invite not only would have asked you to come, but would have asked for the check as well. Individual donors, they asked just ordinary people to donate, ordinary amateurs, and you could, you know, donate as little as 50 quid or something like that. And they had different tiers in terms of things like if you work them, how quickly you get a QSL card, or whether you just got a logbook of the world exclude confirmation or so on. And I did look at, if I can find this, the right page. Yeah, so if you look at funding, if you look at the corporate sponsors, so a whole bunch of sponsors here. There's some familiar names: DX Engineering, Lowe's. You get expert Icon. Icon supplied satellite phones, so throughout the journey, they were able to keep in contact back with base using satellite phones. They weren't dependent on amateur radio. And
that surprised them, because they were line of sight, but they weren't communicating using handheld.
when
When they were on the island.
Oh yeah, they were using VHF to the boat.
Yeah,
they were using VHF handy talkies. Yeah, they were. Yeah. No, they did definitely have some handy talkies, but to communicate back like with the world and their press person, Steve Hand, then they were using Icon satellite phones, and I think they got, you know, gifted the airtime on that as well. They were also using Starlink. Yeah. There was one point, there was some question as to whether Starlink was going to cover down on the Bouvet Island. And there was a whole campaign saying, "Can you please tweet Elon Musk to ask him to move the satellites a bit?" Yeah, just so that they get. But as far as I'm aware, they did get Starlink coverage, which meant that they could get online, and as a result, there was a massive amount of information flowing out from this whole expedition all the time. They also had a tracker on the boat, so as the boat was moving, you could see it. You could just go on the website and see it tracking, so you knew where they sort of were, even if they weren't actually doing anything specific. Yes, so other funding, so clubs and foundations. I mentioned a whole bunch of, so Northern California DX Foundation, German, yes, international, and all the rest. So loads and loads of foundations pitching, and there's the UK CDXC Foundation. It's just called the UK now. They hide their old identity, and so on and so on. So quite a lot of organisations pitched in. They also had a list of individual donors. So if you were an individual donor, you could get your call sign listed on. This is all of the. You can find your call sign in here if you pitched in, you know, $100 or where are we? Where have we got to? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Some people will have pitched in if they've. Yeah, so there you are, 10 grand. 3 people pitched in 10 grand. And well, yeah, and that's greater than it says greater than 10. So, yeah. However, you know, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you see you could be down at the $50 to $100, and there's a lot of people. There you are. Look, you see, $25 to $49. So you get yourself listed here, and then below $25. So it's all about getting numbers of people in, and it's not just the money in this case. It's getting people engaged in the whole project, so that they
incentive to some of those large corporate sponsors. I mean, I'm ready
yeah,
to see.
yeah. It is basically it's
So let's see their photos of icon handmade in the background.
No. But the way in which you publicise these things is through your websites and through your other material and so on. And when the whole thing gets back home again, they'll be doing the lecture circuits. Yeah, and that's where they'll plug. Yeah, so they may have reps from some of those organisations, like DX Engineering. May well have reps there. They shelled in an awful lot of kit. You know, in some cases, it wasn't money; it was equipment. When you see the kit list and the radios that they took, you'll see some familiar names, shall we say, when we get to that point.
That's the plan. It works right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes. They had this whole site plan about how they were going to set up. So it was the first step here was to get the sort of main tents up, and then the radio tents going, and the social tent and the sleeping tent. Don't worry about the detail, just get an idea for the scope and size of all of this lot here. So final setup on the right-hand side there, you know, was antennas all over the place, loads of radio kit. You know, there was a social tent, an unheated tent, and a heated tent, and a sleeping tent. Now, this was the plan. This was the plan. And that was the final system diagram, with all the antennas on the on the right-hand side there, and the kit in the middle there. So all the radio kit, so that various radios could connect to various antennas, and all of the IT stuff and all the rest of it was sorted. And so you can see that there was a huge amount of planning that went into this in terms of what they needed and how they were going to configure it and how they were going to set the whole thing up. Pretty impressive amount of kit. Let's see if we go on to the kit list. Yeah, here's the radio kit list. So they took 3 K3Ss with 600 watt amplifiers. They took 4 more K3Ss with 1000 watt amplifiers. They had one, I couldn't believe this when I saw it, running 1500 watts just for top bands. Yes, right. That was the plan. And then 4 Sun SDR2Xs just for running at FT8. The idea with the FT8 stations is that they would have 4 stations running simultaneously 24 hours, 7 days a week. That was the plan. And like one operator, they weren't automatic bots, but one operator could handle 4 stations simultaneously. That was their plan, and that was the way in which they'd set the whole thing up. So there's the team assembling in London, because they all had a dinner in London. They assembled from various parts of the US and Germany and Norway. They're all getting ready, and then they loaded up and went down to Bryce Norton, not far away from us here. And there they are getting on the RAF plane. And these planes, it's quite surprising to find out that you can just book a seat on a plane and go to the Falklands. You don't have to have a particular reason for going, as far as I'm aware. A friend of mine.
Check it out next time I'm flying in holiday.
Yeah, that's right. It probably doesn't come cheap, but no, a friend of mine up in Ipswich always had a hankering to go to the Falklands, and indeed booked himself on a RAF flight. Went down there for a couple of weeks or so.
Might be harder if you were Argentinian.
Yes. I think you've got to be. Yeah, it's still sensitive down there, but. Yeah, so you've seen the flight path. It goes down to refuel because it's too far to go in one hop, for at least for the things that they're flying.
Yeah, I probably would have gone to Cape Verde and then reconsider my actually to go all the way to the mission to
you could have operated the D41 station and worked the whole world from there. You know, that's a pretty good setup as well. Yeah. So anyway, off they went. There they are coming into Cape Verde. Rather nice looking place with a nice sunset there as they come in and land, and then off they went. So this is the yacht that they were on. It sort of doesn't look as big as you might think, but it's 101-foot aluminium oceanic ketch. So it's quite a well-designed boat, twin masts, and so you can put up as much sail as you need, or that they need, I should say, and a very experienced crew as well, who were driving the whole thing, including, you know, chefs and all the rest of it. So it is a sort of luxury type, if you like, if you like seasick, yes, right. But as you can imagine, with the amount of kit that they were taking, it was pretty well jam-packed before they set off. Here's the container that got taken down by sea, and, you know, absolutely rammed full of stuff. There was a slight hiccup just before they were going to leave because they realized they somehow or other left 3 radios and a linear behind, but they managed to get it on another RAF flight before they left. So they got the whole kit. They even used a forklift truck there to load stuff from where the container was plonked. It must have been craned, I suppose, off a container ship or some sort of ship then using the forklift truck to load that all onto the boat. You can see in the right-hand side there a whole line of jerry cans. We'll see those again in a minute. That's for taking all the fuel for the generators. So a considerable amount of diesel was also loaded up. And there, this is how they sort of got stuff onto the boat. It's not just a matter of carrying it, using ropes to haul stuff across on the divide between the jetty and the boat itself. And you can see the pile of stuff that they had to get on there. There's the jerry cans, bottom left-hand corner, all strapped together. Everything had to be pretty heavily strapped down when they were on the boat because the seas are not exactly level. In fact, when they set off, the first report was, right, everyone's seasick at the moment. For about the first 3 days, nobody was eating anything until, or at least the crew were okay because they're used to it, but not the basic expeditioners and band lovers. And this is them all then just getting ready to set off. You'll see later on that they have full immersion suits as well as just life jackets and all the rest of it, because the sea is pretty cold down there. And you can't go in the water for very long if you haven't got an immersion suit on. But they're all setting off in high spirits before they hit the first storm and had to weather that out. But some nice sunsets down there as well. And you can see as they were approaching Bouvet, this is now cutting quite a large chunk of time out of it. As they went around South Georgia and then eventually arrived towards Bouvet. And you can see already the glaciers on top of Bouvet. It's just somewhere underneath that there's some land, but most of it is glacier. And so when you're going to land, you've got to find, I previously identified the right spot to land, and then you've got to climb up onto the glacier to get any form of sight for your radio station. You can see on the right-hand side, it's not always freezing cold, unless, of course, he's extremely hardy. But it's okay for.
I think the other person here has got bubble hat.
Yeah, well, that's true. I think the Norwegians always wore them. They were like attached to their heads permanently. What was his name? I've forgotten his name there. There's the top left-hand corner. Not Oliver nor Winnie, but the other guy. He always had his hat on. You see every photograph. He's got his 3Y0J hat on. So yeah, they were approaching Bouvet, and then. This was the first place where they landed, and as you can see, it's just sort of really, really rough beach, and the glaciers up there behind. So the task was to get stuff across from the boat, which had to moor out, somewhat distant from island so as not to go onto any rocks or anything. And they had to get the stuff across to the beach and then up the glacier. So how are they going to get the stuff across? The plan was to use these Zodiac dinghies, inflatables, to land people, and then use an anchor line. So they would effectively attach an anchor line out there where the Zodiac was, and then run a line across to the shore, and then pull stuff across manually, and do it in stages to get stuff across to the shore. But unfortunately, what happened as soon as they landed, they ended up with this enormous sea swell, and it was too great to actually land the Zodiac. So the people just had to get out and effectively swim in their immersion suits to get to the shore. And 4 members reached the shore, but then the weather changed. And the weather changed so dramatically that effectively they were stranded on Bouvet with no supplies for 4 days.
4 days?
For 4 days, or at least only the supplies that they'd taken in their small rucksacks and so on. So they had to just camp overnight. They didn't have a tent, they had a tarpaulin that they could use. It was wild camping on Bouvet. They found a crevice that they could get into to shelter from the wind. And bearing in mind, the reason why they were stranded was because of the high winds. So it was freezing cold, very, very high winds, and they were effectively stranded there, for 4 days. Eventually, the winds dropped a bit and they managed to get back onto the boat. And it was at that point that the whole lot of them sat round and thought, we're not going to be able to do this. We had these plans, and they had done masses of planning, and they'd done masses of trying things out and testing and whatever. But they came to the conclusion, they looked at all of the weather forecasts and said, we are not going to be able to get all this kit across the island. So all we can now do is work out what is possible to do safely, and safety was their top priority. What can we do safely and achieve out of all this lot? Because I know we've got, 8 K3Ss and generators and amplifiers and FT8 kit and all the rest of it. But what can we actually get across to the shore and get set up as a station? And they then recast their plans and sort of turned it into like a pico DXpedition rather than a mega DXpedition, which is very sad in terms of what they were hoping to do, because they were hugely ambitious, but that's the reality of life in the Southern Atlantic. And so actually what they took in the end was 2 radios, 2 power supplies, 2 computers, one tent out of all that lot, 5 antennas and 60 meters of coax, 1 petrol generator, because the diesels were too heavy. So they took 1.8 kilowatt petrol. That's all they were managing. So they were only running radios barefoot, so 100-watt radios, no amplifiers, and just enough essential supplies to survive. And they reckoned they could do that, and they did get that lot across there. And they could set up some credible stations, but nothing like what they had hoped to achieve, which is, as I say, a bit sad. But there you are. That's then back then on the beach. You can just see them, the little dots on the left-hand side, the little dots on the beach. Someone's climbed up there to photograph. Oh yeah, you can see the yacht. Can you see the yacht offshore as well? Just out there in the bay. When they had that storm, so 4 of them were abandoned, the yacht actually moved out. So there was no risk of it no risk of it being thrown on the yacht, because it had anchors and so on, but the anchors could pull out in conditions like that. So they felt even more abandoned as the yacht pulled out from some distance from the shore. But that's probably about as close as the yacht actually came in. And then everything had to be taken across in these submersibles. And you see, they even managed to get a ladder across here to climb up parts of the cliff. One of the fascinating bits I found reading the stuff that they were planning beforehand was, I said they'd got all these jerry cans of fuel. And they'd worked out that rather than trying to haul all these incredibly heavy jerry cans up the cliff face, they'd have a pump at the bottom and pump the stuff up. That's right, can by can. And that was their plan to do that. But of course, they never actually needed to do that in the end, because I think all the diesel stayed on the boat, and they just took a petrol generator. So this was their setup in the end, one single tent, a number of poles. I don't know which ones they actually took, and basically wire aerials. I don't know if they got beam antennas or whether they were just using phased antennas anywhere in the original plan. And they set up their single tent station. You see they got some of the drums across there with the kit in, which are waterproof drums, which they floated across and pulled across on the line. This was their operating conditions. So they were supposed to have chairs, they were supposed to have tables, none of those came across. They were sitting on the floor operating in one tent, and just sort of higgledy-piggledy.
Did they get the whole team
At one tent, or did some still?
I think, yes, I haven't seen exactly who came and who went, and whether there was they came in stages or something like that.
Yeah.
That would have been a very small tent for all 12/13 of them.
Did you notice the penguins in the previous slide?
Yeah, yeah. There are, oh yeah, there's some penguins there. There are plenty of slides. If you go to their Facebook page, there's plenty of photographs of penguins. So, and there are comments about the penguin colony just down from where they were. I think there were 3 different species of penguin there. So, you know, there's plenty of happily surviving penguins on Bouvet. It's just the humans that have a problem with it. So they operated CW, they operated sideband, they operated FT8. Because of the limited antennas, then clearly it was only really going to be the big stations that could get through and work them. And as is often the case with these high-profile DXpeditions, there were a lot of people who were, should we say, getting in the way of contacts as well. FT8, when they were running that, if you don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a mode of FT8 called Fox and Hound. And effectively within the audio passband, the Fox, who's the one you're chasing, is down the bottom end of the audio spectrum, and all the hounds are at the top. So the hounds don't go down the same part of the audio spectrum that the Fox is. And then there's a particular protocol about if they call you, then your rig automatically QSYs down to their frequency to complete the contact. So they were using Fox and Hound, and I watched the FT8 display on a few occasions, you know, and masses and masses of stuff on the right-hand side, which are all the hounds calling them. I never got a single decode from them, but that's perhaps not surprising because I've got a very suboptimal station anyway, and theirs is hugely suboptimal at the wrong end of the world. So. Even on like 18 meters when it should have been open, I never got a peep out of 3Y0. And I don't know who did around here, but probably if you look up the stuff, you'll probably find some of the big stations did get through. But operating like that, in the end they cut short the amount of time they were going to spend about 2 weeks operating. But again, they could see storms about to approach, and they decided to cut. They more or less carried on running until the generator ran out of fuel, which was at about 3 o'clock in the morning, then packed up rapidly and got back on the boat, and then battened down the hatches. The comments when they got back on the boat, and they got all the stuff restacked on the boat, a whole bunch of them just went straight down to the bunks because they knew it was going to be very rough. It's like, I'm just going to lie here for the next 3 days, being tossed around on the South Atlantic seas. As I say, with another storm on the way, they went QRT on the 12th of February. It might have been the early hours of the 13th, when the generator ran out of fuel, and they finally, after stacking everything, left on the 16th of February, and they are still on their way back now to South Africa. They're due back in South Africa on Saturday, I think that's their current schedule. No doubt we'll hear much more about it. And they made something like 20,000 plus QSOs, but they wanted to make about 200,000. So it was, well short of their target. There were a number of people who were pirates who weren't 3Y0J, pitching up as well. So some of the contacts that people thought they made weren't contacts as well, which is a bit of a shame that that sort of thing happens. Yeah, that's right. It's just
these guys are trying to do something.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. They have also though had an enormous amount of positive support.
Yes.
So you just always get millions. So there you are. But they did make it to Bouvet and they activated a station or stations. There were 2 expeditions in, let's see, was it 2018 and 20? I've got the date somewhere here. They didn't make it to the island at all. The one in, it's like 2013, there was such a storm, and you think about storm and waves and water going everywhere. There's chunks of ice flying through the air, and a chunk of ice took out the radar antenna on the boat and the satellite navigation system on the boat. So the boat was sort of helpless. It had to revert to old-fashioned methods of navigation. And clearly it wasn't going to make it then to Bouvet, so they had to abandon that. The one in 2018 had engine problems, which meant that they were steaming ahead, but then the captain said, we just can't make it. We're going to have to turn around and go back. If you look at that one, the 2018, I showed you the landing craft that this lot planned to use. Previous expeditions have used helicopters. So a helicopter on the boat, which when you get there, takes stuff across, except that there's then very high risk that the winds are so great you can't use the helicopter. So that's the reason why this expedition decided that they weren't going to attempt to go that way. They were going to use the landing craft.
Possibly slightly cheaper than a helicopter.
I just thought so, yes. I mean, hiring a boat that's also got a helicopter. You want to do what? Yeah, so it is just literally another world, isn't it? I mentioned Facebook pages, and that's where I get an awful lot of information. Well, actually, several places where I get a lot of information from. So I'll just show you a few things. This is the 3Y0J's own website, which was very much built around the whole sponsorship and getting the money and all the rest of it, and setting out the plans. Once they were running, they didn't actually update this website at all. The DX World website had copious updates going the whole time, dxworld.net. Yes, right. Yeah, I wasn't a Twitter follower, so I wasn't watching stuff there. But you're right. Yeah, once they tweeted, it normally went up on Facebook as well.
Right.
So hence I was picking it up there. Hence you get these updates. This is February the 17th, so this is more recent than some. And there's various videos which I think are quite useful to have a look at. And, right. Yeah, this one is rather interesting. This is when they've secured a line across from the beach to the landing craft. They then had to physically haul stuff. But it's raining as well, and you can see the sea. It's just pounding away. To dry their clothes, all they had to do was hang them out because the wind was so strong that it just dried everything. So if you got wet, you could get things dry again. Just leave them on the rocks, or in this case, they've got a line up there to dry stuff. When they did that first landing, the sea was so high that the waves were going all the way up to the glacier, which meant when they got off the boat, it then just got washed back again. So it's just really, really. And I say they did masses of preparation, but in spite of that, you never know what the conditions are going to be. And they could have got a nice slot in the weather, and they could have got there for a reasonable amount of time and operated. So it shows the boat bobbing around a lot. You can see, it looks like there's flecks of snow, ice, rain, and everything else that's done as well. Let's just say it's not the sort of place that I would go to. Yeah, so February 2018 was the 3Y0Z. This is not the boat they were in, by the way. This is the South African Atlas. It was a much bigger one. And that was aborted, as it says here, the ship heading back to Chile, bad weather and some problems. I can't remember if that was the one where they smashed the radar antennas. So that one didn't succeed. Yeah, there was 3Y0I in, oh, hang on. Oh no, 2021. Okay, so yes, this is 3Y0I was in 2021, so more recent than the 2018 one. Let's see. Yeah, so. Oh, okay. So it looks like that's still something in planning then. So yeah, different people attempt to do things, but the last two expeditions have failed for a variety of reasons, and it's still a very alluring place to go, mad though it is to attempt to get there. So I suppose I could return to that first question: how far would you go?
Cape Verde.
You would, yeah. It does. It's warm there.
Sure, but
well, if you go to the Falkland Islands, there's a whole bunch of amateurs there, and you can use their stations. So was it Bob, isn't it, who's on very frequently? I've worked here, but he doesn't QSL. But there are a whole bunch of them. In fact, there's a great photograph in the 3Y0J blurb there, showing them with the Falkland Islands hands as well. But it does sort of make you wonder about the most either inaccessible parts of the world or the most rare parts of the world that are activated for amateur radio purposes. Yeah, this is actually some quite nice photographs of them on Bouvet itself. I think actually, if you count the number here, they're probably all on the island, operating there. We've seen a couple of these pictures before. They got a heater in the middle of the tent, so at least they were able to generate a bit of warmth. There's some penguins in the sunset, very nice. Nice sunsets. Oh, loads of penguins there, silhouettes. And a seal. There's the boat you can see in the distance there. Everything's covered in snow. Nighttime operation. Not comfortable when you're operating for long periods, sitting on the ground with a laptop on you, brewing up some tea by the look of it.
that wouldn't be a fire that kind of thing.
Yeah, very well, very well.